Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome, dear viewers, to our episode of Dawah Dojo. Dawah Dojo is intended to be a no-holds-barred discussions on issues of relevance facing the Muslims and here and abroad. We want to be transparent. We like to get a broad range of opinion. Join us on this journey. Today, we want to talk about lies, lies, and more lies. The elephant in the room is basically Israel and its various atrocities. And one of the most recent kind of inexcusable atrocities. If I was to talk about Palestine, we'd be here all evening talking about the various atrocities. But this one in particular is just it's so obvious. It's the issue of the pager bombings that happened in Lebanon. So basically, a sovereign location, multiple bombs, over 1,000 people targeted, indiscriminate. They're almost a dictionary definition of international terrorism, because there's, irrespective of where these people were currently, regardless of who you think the individuals are, pages had been disseminated and they committed this mass atrocity. It was completely, there's no way of controlling where people are. Civilians died, children died. I mean, that's nothing new to the Israelis, but the repercussions for this, or the lack of repercussions, if you think about it, I mean, any state, could you think of any state that can get away with this kind of activity? Can you imagine the kind of double standards and covering up that's happened? It's so blatant, it's so overwhelmingly obvious. I can't even imagine. It's like someone soiled their pants in broad daylight and they're saying, "No, I'm fine, nothing happened." This is the level that it's reached. And in terms of just completely,
there'd be a full scale invasion of another country if they did what Israel's doing tomorrow. You know, there'd be boots on the ground from every Western nation.
Exactly. It'd be a coalition.
Yeah, no chance.
It's insane. I mean, just the fact that. So you imagine, like, so what they did was, you do this thing, and there's no way of controlling who's going to get who's going to be targeted. It even went across other nations. So there were people like in Britain and America that were targeted. I don't know if there were any fatalities, but this is how indiscriminate it was. And the thing is, when I say it's a dictionary definition of terrorism, it is that you target an entire civilian populace where these people have, are freely mixing amongst, and you have video footage of it happening in like markets and stuff. And then somebody can be driving a car and it can happen. But just the fact that the media coverage, they haven't even picked up on this, or sufficiently picked up on the fact that this is textbook terrorism.
It is terrorism. It is terrorism, right? And if we look at the term of what terrorism is, and if we're looking at international law and the United Nations, which is the obvious criteria at this point in time among most states of this world of what is considered legal and illegal, and what's considered terrorism and what is not, it's defined as use of force for political purposes perpetrated by non-state actors. So if it's taken as part of international law, you're already legalizing the use of force for political means to one classification of people, which would be a state that's internationally recognized, part of the UN, XYZ, and demonizing the use of force by those that are not considered to be part of the state. So there's an imbalance of power there. If you are defending yourself against a state, by that very definition, you are considered to be a terrorist. Now, Israel, and we can look at its actions, what it's doing in southern Lebanon, the nature of the attacks, the fact that, anyone can pick up these devices, it could be children and all the rest of it. I mean, the question here, and if I may go into it a bit, is what is the Jewish, or rather the Zionist Israeli state's stance on terrorism? And what is the connection to it? And also this imbalance. So when you say lies, 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 that's exactly what it is. It's demonized for some and legalized for others. Now, Israel, before it was actually established in 1948, there was an organization called the Haganah, okay, which was the Jewish Defense Force, and it was basically set up in the settlements and towns in Palestine. All of the youth and adults joined, and they engaged in military training, and they received weapons from different parts of Europe. And they also started to manufacture weapons. After a certain point in time, after establishing these militias, they turned their sights on the British Palestine Mandate, because basically the British Palestinian Mandate wasn't following exactly what the Zionists wanted at that point in time. So they engaged in sabotage, destroying railways and attacking British troops in order to drive them out of Palestine. They also set up an illegal migration couriering service, shipping people from Europe to Israel, giving them eventually, Jewish recognition, which led to Israeli nationality. And that organization was called Mossad, right? And the Haganah and Mossad had operations and a presence in the United States, Poland, Germany, Italy, Slovakia, and Morocco. Now, this terrorist organization became the Israeli Defense Force in 1948. So now, if you have an organization whose basis is on terrorism, whose basis is on illegal land grabbing, whose basis is on illegally bringing migrants over to occupied territories, we can understand why the IDF does exactly what it does, why the Israeli army does what it does. And it goes beyond utilitarianism, meaning using what works. It's actually based on their biblical scriptures, and they justify it. So in the Torah, in the Old Testament, and not just that, but also in the Gemara, which are another one of their scriptures that they hold, there is a commandment, and that can be found in 1 Samuel 15:3, and it says, allegedly Hashem, God of the children of Israel, who has chosen people, now go and smite Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have, and spare them not, but slay both man and woman, infant and breastfeeding child, ox and sheep, and camel and ass. Now, if I can go into that, this is a commandment, okay? And that's known as a mitzvah. It's a commandment in Judaism. And to practice these acts, you're engaging in an act of worship from a Jewish perspective. That's why the rabbis are blessing the troops before they're going out and doing exactly that, targeting and killing women, children, and babies, because that's acceptable under their belief. Who are Amalek? Amalek are the Canaanites, and they're the people that are literally from the Gaza Strip all the way up to southern Lebanon. But this same rule applies not just to Amalek, but it applies to other tribes which are not part of the children of Israel. There are even commandments in Psalms 137:9, where it says, blessed is he who smashes the babies against the rocks. So when you see the euphoria and the parties and the happiness and the pride in which the Israeli Defense Force is engaging in these crimes against humanity, it's because they're engaging in worship, and they don't give a damn about international law, because they know that the United States, which is the main hegemon at this point in time, fully supports the state of Israel. And they do that not only because they want to have an allegedly pro-democratic, Western, non-Muslim, non-Arab presence in a strategic location in the Middle East among Arab Muslim states, but also because of the doctrine of the founding fathers, which is ultimately that of Christianity, where they don't want to go against the Israelites because they follow the passage in the Bible that says, those that bless Israel shall be blessed, and those that are against or curse Israel shall be cursed. So engaging in international terrorism, using pagers, blowing up civilians in different parts of the world, it is considered normal for them, and it's standard practice.
That's an interesting. That's an excellent historical basis and spiritual basis. However, there is the other point of view, which is that Herzl, the founding father of Zionism himself, was an atheist, and essentially the Zionist movement was actually at odds with a lot of the classical Judaic affiliated people. So, for example, a lot of from a doctrinal point of view, they're waiting on the Messiah. So it was a hard sell for the Jews, for the Zionists, to co-opt Jewish people to the cause, because they have to wait for the Messiah. So some would say, so a lot of Jewish people had happily settled in Muslim environment, in Muslim countries. For example, in Iraq, Avi Schleim does a very good podcast on Thinking Muslim, where he goes through his own experience, his family's experience in Iraq, and he was actually living in Iraq, and he moved quite early on because there were certain acts of terror. Now it's likely to have been committed by Zionists to try and instigate people to leave and create this kind of tension, because this is an important point, which is we don't frame. So, for example, the entirety of the alleged the claim to Palestine is on a biblical, on the Old Testament promise. As Muslims, we don't refer to a prophecy or things to lay claim to anyone. We have a completely different concept. Our concept is about justice, about people having their rights. We have examples of, for example, at the time of Ali radiallahu anh, where he accused a Jewish person of stealing his shield, and he brought witnesses, but the witnesses they weren't. There was either they're underage, or one of them was one of his sons. So it was thrown out of court. This is the head of state. So the point is, we don't define things based off of expedience, utilitarianism. We have our own hukum shara. So another good example of this is, while the Spanish Inquisition was happening, the Christians were the ones persecuting the Jews, and they've had a history of persecuting the Jews. So it's a European Christendom problem, which they've effectively foisted on top of us. So when the situation happened that the Jewish people were being persecuted in Spain, what did they go for protection? They went to the Muslims, to the Ottoman Khilafah. So to the extent 1/3 of Istanbul became Jewish, and they thrived in the Muslim world. So it may be, there is certainly that secular scumbag Netanyahu plays up on this whole Amalek point of view, and it's certainly definitely within the Zionist outlook. They have dehumanized people over generations. In fact, what's interesting to also note is that some people who are pro-Israel, Jewish people, even people like, for example, quite prominent people like Seth Rogen, they were sold the lie that it's people without a land. Well, they started to realize, hold on, there are people there. They were sold a lie, and they've actually. So, for example, there was demos in I believe it was Grand Union Station by prominent the Jewish Voice for Peace. So there is this backlash even from amongst the Jewish people. So I think that is worth a note. I think Zionism has hijacked Judaism in the same way that Daesh, for example, hijacked Islam to say that we're going to do all the X, Y, Z, and we're going to, we're laying claim to an Islamic point of view. They are
absolutely
worse.
It's the same as Saudis and the Madkhalis, for example, hijacking Islam to serve their own position as well. The Zionists use particular parts of Judaism to suit themselves, but as you say, authentic Judaism is completely against Zionism because it's seen as non-Jewish.
It's an interesting parallel as well, because Israel itself would not be able to exist without the Arab leaders. And after, for example, Nakba, you mentioned 1948 and the Nakba. When they attacked, the Palestinians did start to organize. Who persuaded them to stand down and persuaded the Muslims that Britain will honor their promise and return what was taken?
Was it Abdulaziz ibn Saud, or one of the Saudis? Yeah.
You get a prize. Yes, it was him. Imagine that. So even look at, for example, so look, Palestine. The whole reason Israel actually came to exist is because we were vacant. It would never come to existence if we weren't doing our own, had our own house in order. If the Ummah had united on their principles, had proper governance, hadn't become defeated, divided, etc., Palestine would not have been lost. Certainly, there were always periods of instability. if it's the gangrenous, it was the festering wound in ourselves that allowed this to happen. Also, another point worth making is they may have this religious point of view. For example, the extreme Christians. You have the evangelical side who do believe in like end times type of prophecy. However, the simplest desire is this: Israel is effectively a military base for America. It used to be the British. It was a British tool. Then they gravitated towards America, and essentially the government has with AIPAC, it has considerable influence, but ultimately it is an outpost for American influence. And the Arab leaders are their first line of defense. I don't know if I said it already, but Menachem Begin, the first prime minister of Israel, said the first line of defense for Israel are the Arab leaders. Second comment was Golda Meir when there was an attack against the Arabs. Like I can't remember. Apologies, I'm getting on. I don't always have complete recollection. There was an event where Israel attacked, and then Golda Meir, she couldn't sleep all night, fearing reprisal. When the reprisal never came, she knew that that's it. You can get away with it. And this is actually very topical right now as well, because the ineptitude, lack of response, and I'd say, and actually collusion. Forget ineptitude. Inept is when you're not able to do something. Collusion of the Arab regimes has emboldened Israel. Moreover, even if you're in that situation of lack of support, if you stand down and you don't provide a strong response, they will come for you even more, because you're talking about a satanic bully.
Well, there's like multiple factors to consider. Alhamdulillah, you made a lot of points. I mean, in terms of the time of when it came around, right, in the 40s, going back to the core, and like you mentioned, Arab leaders, for example, right? You had the fall of the Ottomans in the 20s, right? The official fall of the Ottomans in the 20s. Now, the absence of the Khilafah made a huge impact to anything being preserved or anything like that happening in that region. Then you had the likes of Abdulaziz ibn Saud, I think that's the name of the first Saudi leader, being established pretty much in like the 30s, right? And then you have the country today, which is called Jordan, which originated by the Al-Sharif, right? And Al-Sharif was originally promised what is called Saudi Arabia today. And then he was double-crossed by the British because Saud was seen as a more reliable ally. And he would be better off for the British and the Western powers to control that area. So as an apology, Al-Sharif was given what was called Transjordan, that piece of land, and said, you basically can run that. Now, when we go, I mentioned this because when this talking point of Muslim leaders or Arab leaders or whatever you want to call them comes up, sometimes we have as Muslims this naivety that these people still have our best interests at heart and that they still even represent us. And there seems to be this extreme level of husn al-dhan that I don't see where is being justified from. Again, you always say this, if you've said it once, Rash, you've said it a million times, we need to pick up our history books and we just need to actually look at objective history and what happened. It's mainly Madkhali talking points that this comes from, but these people, their origin is nefarious. Their origin has been not of their own accord, not of any type of valid jihad or anything that was made to protect Muslims in that area and then establish ruling. They were planted by Western colonial powers, right? Who planted them because they knew they'd be reliable and they would further uphold their interests. So the Muslims need to, as a collective, we need to wake up and realize that these people are not our allies. These people sitting in our seats are not our allies. They're not our friends, not here to represent Muslim interests or any ummatic cause at all, right? Whether it's Egypt or whether it's Jordan, whether it's Saudi or any of these countries, right? So that's something that we need to eliminate from our minds, that at the end of the day, these people are not going to do anything for us, right? And the sooner we wake up and realize that, the sooner we'll be better off. And then you have to even call the Muslim leaders, I'm not going to make equivocal statements about whatever, but I think anyone with a bit of common sense can see, look, for example, we call Muslim leaders UAE, right? Any type of destruction that happens to Muslims in the world, the UAE is always there, right? You look at Libya's situation today with Haftar, and then you have the Madkhalis running certain areas, and then you have the Western powers in some areas. Who was funding Haftar and the Wahhabi mission out there, right? It was the Saudis' money. and the UAE coming there. Look at Sudan, in the middle of a civil war right now, destructive civil war, people dying every single day, right? Who's in there again? The UAE's hands there. Any type of destruction that comes, all the the usual suspects are there. So to continue having this lens that no, they know the greater agenda, they know what ultimately what's good for us, and this like Shahid Bolson statements that come out of like we have to give them the benefit of the doubt is absolute nonsense. Secondly,
I agree. Yeah.
Regarding like Jamil's points with like the US, for example, I think it's an interesting discussion and maybe even a question to pose of like, from a government perspective, I don't feel it's coming from like a Christian cause. I don't think it's like like a Christian understanding as to why they're defending Israel. For me, it seems just political. It just seems like in terms of their best interests. Having something like Israel, which is like you said, Rash, the biggest base, US base, basically in the Middle East, right, is only going to be beneficial for them. And then it makes no sense for them to remove. If you have all the leaders in your pockets and you have a central place like Israel, you're never going to want it to leave, and you're going to do anything you can to support it, right? I think even the Christian understanding of things, like in terms of the extreme evangelicals, is probably a very small minority of like Bible Belt region, like very, very practicing core of like America that still remains. But even on like a majority scale, it's very much a secular nation, right? Even the Christians, majority of Christians will probably be very secular. So I thought, what is really on the ground level, people supporting? I feel like it's the usual tropes of Israel's the only democracy in the Middle East, right? Israel is, is the only country that allows this, only allows this. It gives freedom for this. It gives freedom for this, right? So I don't really, I think, have a direct question.
That's excellent. That's excellent you raise that, because this shows us how malleable the situation can become. So, for example, now imagine, look, as Muslims, imagine if we started saying something unequivocal, say, I don't know, say we did have a Khilafah and we started mouthing off against it. Imagine the kind of grief, and rightly so, we would get. But for Zionists, they think this is their holy land. Or, imagine the non-secular. This is their beacon. For a Jewish person to cross that divide, so imagine it was before, the idea of Zionism was pariah, was ridiculous, you can't do it. Then it reached its peak. And the early generations, when they were the settlers, they had this zeal to them. And what you see now, for example, you see the decimation and the unwillingness for conscripts or what have you, is because they've reached their peak. So imagine somebody at that point to then reevaluate and come away from that and say, so they have this, the phrase, the self-hating Jew. It was almost become part of vernacular that you have to accept this state. It's part of your identity. Now people, imagine taking the stand. Imagine we're all Jewish here. And to say, no, we're holding up a mirror to this state and saying, look, it's unjustifiable. Many go back to their own scripture and say this isn't justifiable for our own scriptures. Obviously, there's a level of interpretation. We're not going to theology of the Jewish scripture, but many of them have realized that this is horrific. So imagine crossing that bridge. Imagine turning against this, what you've been taught from day one. So in that sense, the events from Gaza have opened people's eyes. It's leveled the playing field, because it's all very well listening to a sanitized debate between two people, one person saying, oh, it's to defend ourselves, but then seeing what that entails. And then seeing, for example, the amount of time, like, for example, the hospital bombings, the targeted people who leaving there and saying, look, the amount, for example, just listening just today, one video saying they were targeting toddlers, actual gunshot wounds to their heads. Before then, October 7th, there used to be like at demonstrations, targeting the legs, the knees, because they can get away with it, but targeting snipers.
Well, that's why I told you, this is what I'm trying to say. We can't get away from it. It is an act of worship for them to target children, because it's a commandment, it's a mitzvah. It has to be absolutely clearly understood. There is a distinction between extreme Zionism and Judaism, but the Zionists use Judaism, and there is clearly a special relationship between the United States and Israel. And a large part of that, although it is political and geostrategic, a large part of that is based upon religion. The Constitution of the United States of America is strongly rooted in Christianity, and that special relationship is based upon supporting Israel based on religious doctrine.
But
And it's when you look at
on that, like that, couldn't that be flipped on Muslims, for example? If we're saying that at its core, it's still a Jewish, centric core to it, or is using valid Jewish scripture, couldn't someone flip that for like Daesh as Muslims, where Muslims categorically say that Daesh does not represent Islam at all, right? And it's just bloodthirsty barbarians. Couldn't that like similar like rhetoric be used for like our case, for example?
Well, yeah, it can be used. Daesh is a different aspect, but when we look at the United States of America and its support for Israel, the greatest ally of the United States of America in the Middle East is Saudi Arabia. It causes far less problems for the United States than Israel does. Every time Israel is breaking international law, every time Israel is engaging in these acts, it knows that it's pulling the United States into this field where now it looks like a huge hypocrite with regards to its adherence and support of international law. What does the United States actually gain realistically from Israel that it's not gaining from Saudi Arabia, that supports them quietly and gives them the oil and the petrol that it needs?
Well,
the thing is,
I don't think Israel and Saudi provide the same things to US. They may be benefit, but I think they don't provide the same type of benefits.
No, absolutely not.
Well, one thing that's very telling, and this is why Israel will always be the better partner for America, and so would India. Despite the fact that, take the Pakistani government, they're whores for America. They are whores for America. They are whores for America. Despite that, they know that the two countries have a very similar dynamic, which is they can be overthrown. MBS, when he recently said, I can't do more than this because my life is in danger. Yeah, that's very telling, because Israel will be an existential threat for them to be there. They will fight tooth and nail, or one thing, the dual national, so it's actually not going to be to the final conclusion. However, Saudi is effectively an imposed regime over a people who, if activated, brought back to a better understanding of Islam, removing this ridiculous notion about blind subservience to the rulers, they can be gone. That's why so many of their assets are over in the West. That's why so much investments are made in the West. And it is another example. I don't know if I mentioned it before, but I once read
Donald Trump said it, didn't he? Donald Trump in 2016, when he said to MBS, he goes, "You guys need to relax, because if it wasn't for us, you wouldn't be here. Like, you wouldn't last a month." Like, he said it, back then to them. So yeah.
The entire security apparatus was set up by the West. So the thing is that the minute they have to be sustained, they have to be kept alive on life support. The minute that goes, they will be overthrown. Inshallah. Jordan is, it's probably going to be imminent. Like this. Another thing. I need to do a segue here in terms of how shameless they are. So that Abdullah, his entire state has one purpose and one purpose alone. It's a buffer zone for Israel.
100%.
It was set up by the British as basically scraps, and it's just there to serve Israel. And then he had to cheat, like Deus. There must be. Is there a Deus tape 2.0? Wait, Rania. Oh, I'll wet myself again. Can you go on TV and make some empty words so that I look good? It's like,
but they all do.
I mean, the fact that she goes on TV and says this, Kutti, your husband, he's right there. He's right there. Tell him to stop. It's just Jarell. You don't need, save your words. Don't say this. Here's a stick. Poke him. Tell him to open the borders then. He's in hand in glove with these people.
Yeah, but it's exactly as you say. Look, the policy of the United Kingdom has always been divide and rule, right? And when you divide a territory, as Fahim's mentioned, Trans Jordan, Trans Syria, all of these different areas, and quite rightly, some of them go back to the Saudi royal family in any event. When you divide a nation and you establish nationalism, which is so disliked and anti-Islamic, you remove a common united interest and you have national self-interest, which leads often to conflict or indifference. And as you both said, right, Jordan, Syria, and Egypt ultimately are acting as buffers to protect Israel. And as we can see now, the conflict's taking place in none of those countries, but it's taking place with Lebanon on the southern border, and we can discuss that. Now, these nation states are clearly nation states with their own national self-interests, which connect to the ruling elite self-interests. So when you initially said, Brash, at the beginning, that these Muslim countries don't claim to represent everyone, that's absolutely true. It's in the name. If we talk about Saudi Arabia, Al-Mamlaka Al-Arabiya Saudiya, the kingdom of Saudi Arabia. It's a monarchy related to a royal family of Al Saud and their tribe and their people. So when you have all of these people in the United Kingdom or Europe and the West, and they're so proud that their Quran was printed in the King Fahd Printing Academy, or they're allowed to go to the Haram, and the Haram's being maintained. Okay, so you look after the Kaaba, you give it a bit of a clean, and you look after Masjid al-Medina, and now you're the protectors and guides of the whole Muslim Ummah. We have to obey and follow you, and we have to defend you at every instance, and you are ulil amr, and obedience to you is obedience to Allah and His Messenger. The Saudis are laughing at you because they won't even give you an iqama to come and stay in Saudi Arabia, no matter how much you sell out your deen to protect them and you support the Dawah, because they've never claimed to represent Muslims. They've never said that we're responsible for protecting and looking after the Muslim Ummah. So we're looking after the people in our own borders, and they're just about doing that.
And inviting the American troops to assist.
The only country, by the way, where your passport is an allegiance to a family and not a land, which is
Islam,
which is a weird thing, right? when you're a British citizen, you're not a citizen of the royal monarchy, right? You're a citizen of the land, and the monarchy happens to rule it. But Saudi is the only nation on earth that, when you're given citizenship in the fairy tale, your allegiance is to a family, which is.
There's one more you forgot. You forgot Zamunda coming to America, Prince of Zamunda, his passport.
No, you made some excellent points there, Jim. Honestly, even Morocco is another case of that rulership. I think another long-term strategic reason, cause as to why they've been so easily been able to get away with the level of terrorism they have, is they've spent almost 30-40 years dehumanizing Muslims and people of that region, right? They were, the Soviets went into Afghanistan in the 70s and into the 80s, right? And then afterwards you had the Iraq wars, you had the Afghanistan wars, had the Arab Spring. You've had 40 plus years now of the West, in their media machine, and just simply justifying hundreds upon hundreds of reasons why these people are okay to slaughter. Right, because they are barbaric, because they are backwards, because they don't adapt to the modern world, right? And they're living like this. That the US has been doing it for so long. Now that Israel's doing it, and that Israel's attached by the hip to the US, it's just seen as an extension of it. And for the people who are pro-Israel, they see it. And like you said, Jamil, there's also that religious aspect, but there's also just that, if you want to call it, humanitarian aspect, where people just see it as a valid thing. On a day-to-day, people may not voice it on a ground level as much, but a lot of people think Islam is backwards. They think Islam is barbarian, right? And at the end of the day, maybe Israel's doing a somewhat good thing in getting rid of this, by extension, this evil of Islam. And then, the Arabs are a bit savage, the Arabs are a bit backwards, they won't adapt, so someone will have to force them. And if they're threatening the sovereignty of the only democratic nation in the Middle East, right, then, why are we complaining?
I'm glad you brought this up, because this is exactly the narrative that your pseudo-intellectuals like Sam Harris and Bill Mutmara use. they, for example, they use this to say, oh, Israel is we're going to do it. Basically, always frame it. These guys are crazy, etc., etc. However, I said once before that there is a barakah in the sacrifice of the people of Gaza, which we will not see, but we will witness in here on forward, and that is when people see the repercussions, when they see the things that are actually happening, when they, for example, I gave this example before of that brother who lost his grandchild and he kissed her eyes and he's like the soul of my soul. When they see all these kind of examples, these are human beings, and there's a special quality to them. Not just that they're, you have the natural empathy. You have the natural empathy for any creation going through suffering like that. However, when they see how they handle that suffering and how they only turn to Allah, that has started people on a soul-searching mission. There have been many prominent people who've become Muslim now. Moreover than that, in terms of what we see is we see the devastation, we see the bodies racking up, we see the 10% maybe, if we take the Lancet conservative estimate, we're close to 10% of the population being killed. But we see all these things and we can easily become disheartened. However, Israel has lost the diplomatic war. Their own people who have been staunch Zionists are now finding it an untenable position. You just got just simple like Candace Owens, all this. There's a long list of people. They can no longer sustain this point of view.
You're right, actually, and like the pager incident is like another key example of this, right? Blatant act of terrorism, right, on a foreign piece of land, right? The pages could have been anywhere, like they were in markets, out in public. You don't know who's with it when it's going to go off and explode, right? There could be children around, there could be women around, whatever the case is, and blatantly just killing people like this, detonating pages. It almost shows you like the panic and downward spiral of Israel at the same time. That Netanyahu is so desperate, like right now, that things that even he know, his cabinet know, America and any analyst know that you should not be doing, he's doing. Because I feel like he can feel, from underneath him, like it's starting to go, right? He knows if as soon as this war ends, he's gone either way, right? He is no longer going to be in power. And the only way he can preserve his power is a valiant victory in the eyes of the world and for his Israeli citizens. By the way, also Israeli citizens leaving by droves in Israel, which is an irony in and of itself, right? People protesting daily in Israel, like Israeli citizens, against Netanyahu. So yeah, I mean, like you just see the level of desperation. Like they talk about now, he wants to do another ground offensive in Lebanon and all these things. He's absolutely desperate, and I think the only strength he really has is again his funding and his and the technology that comes from America. Because even if they do suck on the ground, they can bomb everything to smithereens. The level of tech that they have, they don't really need to go on the ground unless it's like a last case scenario where it's just all out battle on the ground, like they did in Syria, for example, right? What changed, the course of the war in Syria for a large part of it was America's use of, drones and missiles and the technology that they had, where they didn't need to send boots on the ground, to go die. They could, from across the world, aim on them and just absolutely obliterate them.
I think
well, this is it. I mean, it comes down to what are the goals of Israel in war, because that will determine whether they win or lose. So now you have your goals that you don't express to the world, and then you have the justification for the war to try and achieve those goals. So the public facade was, in October, we were attacked. We now have to defend ourselves, right? And their stated goal was to remove the threat posed by Hamas. Now, Hamas is a group of people that want to have a Palestinian state and are against the state of Israel due to the crimes that Israel has committed. Now, for every father and mother that is killed, their children are far more likely to join an organization and become members of Hamas and want to join their parents in the next life than had they not experienced that. they have increased the support for anti-Israel position. They have increased the support and sympathy for those that wish to engage in military actions against the state of Israel. And this is being supported by ordinary people on the streets of Western democratic countries like London, Paris, and Madrid. And they have failed in that objective. So now, by turning their sights to southern Lebanon, all we can see, their true intention is a massive land grab, right? And now this has been identified by the International Court of Justice, where they have confirmed that Israel's legislation and measures violate the international prohibition on 1, racial segregation, 2, apartheid. And the ICJ mandated Israel to end its illegal occupation, dismantle its settlements, provide full repatriations to Palestinian victims, and facilitate the return of displaced people. So what would happen is the IDF would mortar and bomb villages and towns. They would then send their troops in and say this is now a military zone. And then any of the houses that are not absolutely flattened, they'd be moving Israeli settlers in. So Israel cannot win in removing its enemies. You can't remove your enemies by force unless you engage in total genocide, which they are trying to do, but they can't successfully wipe out absolutely everyone. So they're looking for a land grab in southern Lebanon and all of that area from the West Bank. And the problem is they'll focus on the easy pickings, but within no state of time, very soon, they'll be turning their sights on areas in Jordan, areas in Syria, and areas in Egypt, which form the greater Israel, which is what they're actually after.
I personally don't agree with much of that. So, on first things first, in terms of Netanyahu, I think he's basically just trying to fail forward. He knows that his next step is probably to be P. Diddy's bunkmate. He doesn't want that. He doesn't have enough lotion for that. So he knows that he's got prison on the cards. He wants to precipitate a greater war to co-opt America in. All this stuff in terms of attacking sovereign territory wants to bring America in for a greater war with Iran, and they've always wanted that. Iran is self-serving. The elephant in the room is that they are self-serving. We know, like people say, "Oh, why are you attacking them? The axis of resistance." I don't deal in empty words, empty rhetoric. If interested, Syria is probably the worst regime of all of them. Probably the worst of all. They for example, you could kick them in the testicles 50 times, and you know what their response will be? We will respond at the right time. Never. The right time is never. They are effectively, the line of defense. They're basically just, they're like a crackhead. Anyone's going to give them a hit, they'll say we're your best friend. So there is no honesty there. So Israel's interest is to exacerbate the war. Now, in terms of, they will certainly want to create as much destruction as possible. They'll certainly want to eliminate as much as possible. I do think, though, if it goes to a ground war, it will be devastation for them. Now let's look at, for example, Gaza. Obviously, yes, we're talking about urban combat. We're talking about amphibia, fighting built-up areas. We're talking about when you, in guerrilla warfare, if you destroy a building, that actually helps your enemy in the sense that they can start using that for cover and what have you. They have been decimated in Gaza. Entire divisions have had to regroup. The Golani Brigade had their sphincters handed to them by email, so they're done. They don't have enough people. That a lot of the senior commanders that were killed. The reason that so many of them died because the new recruits were not willing to take the lead. So their seniors had to go, and they're young people as well, just completely promoting, and it's just basically decimated. So they don't have the boots on the ground for a ground invasion. They always wanted to push America to take over. As far as them wanting to take over Egypt, why would you? Sisi is a compliant whore. Why would you want? It's like that's Israel's side piece. Why would he want to jeopardize that? Israel don't have the numbers to even contemplate occupying greater numbers. Now, as far as going to Lebanon, if it gets to a ground war with Lebanon, I personally think that Hezbollah has certainly been compromised in terms of, and also the other elephant in the room, they are not getting. I don't think that Ummah will forgive them what they did in Syria. I don't think the Ummah will forgive them for what they did in Syria. It's Allah's universe and how He chooses to correct them, punish them. How if they seek tawbah, whatever. It's certainly not the time to side with the Israelis. That's for sure. That's definitely out there. Like if, for example, even if Iceland said, you know what, Israel, we're going to go for you. Say, you know what, Iceland, we don't have the same creed as you, but yeah, have them, go. So, in terms of this does not exonerate them one iota for what they did in Syria. However, it does look like they have been heavily compromised. For them to have taken out command and control, all this, even this pager attack, heavily compromised. It's even despite this kind of confusion that must have been seeded through so much decimation. If it goes to the ground, if the people are decentralized sufficiently, I don't think Israel's going to be able to walk this one off, and they don't want to be able to, because if it goes
Carry.
If it goes to whether it's jungle warfare, urban warfare, under tunnels, etc., Hezbollah is effectively a mini state in terms of the amount of resources that they have. Gaza was a prison camp, and what they pulled off is tactically generations from now, people will be analyzing it. I think analysts like Scott Ritter, I think Norman Finkelstein, it's remarkable what they did. It's absolutely remarkable what they did. Hezbollah has much more resources than that. I don't think Israel will come off lightly on this. The failing forward mentality of Netanyahu specifically, is to try and push America to go to war. And I think they don't, the actual reality is, if America doesn't come in, Israel is bleeding out. It's so bleeding out economically. Eilat's gone, economy is shafted. People who have been reservists, they're leaving their jobs. They're militarily, assets in terms of tanks, it's decimated. In terms of politically, they're done. They have no more legitimacy. The amount of people, the ICC, ICJ, the amount of people, recognizing Palestine, they are done.
Well, this goes back to my point. This goes back to my point, right? About the reasons why the United States supports Israel. The last thing the United States wants to do now is be potentially drawn into a war with Iran via supporting Israel in Lebanon, right? When we look at the military capability and capacity of Israel, it's relatively strong. When we look at this infiltration, when we look at these targeted attacks, Israel's shown that it can attack and destroy and blast towns and villages to smithereens, but it can also infiltrate a major militia such as Hezbollah to the extent that it can pack explosives in its means of so-called secure communication, which are pagers, and set them all off at the same time, targeting the holders of those, right? So there is definitely a deep level of infiltration within Hezbollah's organization by Israel. And by doing a spectacular attack like that, you're demonstrating that you've got precision capability. And obviously we know that anyone can pick up pagers, right? But they're relatively targeted to the owners of those. Those are the main targets. And to get so close to those individuals in that way, when you shut down your enemy's communication, when you make them feel unsafe to use technological devices for fear of it being booby-trapped, it has a very, very strong psychological effect, and it causes disunity within the ranks of that organization. So when we look at the potential attacks that could take place in southern Lebanon, this is why I do believe that it is a land grab. We saw the conflict that took place between Israel and Hezbollah in 2007. Hezbollah did relatively well on that. It ended pretty much as a stalemate, but Israel has taken land from Lebanon, which Lebanon's never been able to take back. And ultimately, unless you do have the state of Lebanon supporting Hezbollah, and with them potentially either Syria, which we know is highly unlikely, or Iran, if there were to be a ground interstate conflict between Israel and Lebanon, that's where we would see a potential opening, because from there, if you had one state with a clear front fighting against Israel, they could open the borders and then open anyone to come in and join a potential conflict, which is a very different stance to Egypt, for example.
I think personally, like, I think I'm maybe midway between your guys' thoughts in how you see it. I do agree with Jamil in that I do believe it is to a certain degree a land grab, because a colonial state, settler state, at the end of the day, wants to take things away from you, right? I don't think it's as far as going all the way to Egypt or, you know, going all that sort of stuff. I don't think there's a need for that. But I think if they could take the whole of Lebanon, they would. And, you know, the gimp that is, you know, the king of Jordan, right? He'll do what he's been told to do. So if it's a case of Israel got that powerful and that victorious, where they could actually take Jordan, they probably would, right? My questions are, you mentioned, you know, people might or probably won't forgive Hezbollah for what they did in Syria. Does the larger general Muslim population know what Hezbollah did in Syria, firstly?
I think the Muslim world does.
Do we forget quickly? And ultimately, like we mentioned before about the Arab states, right? What is the alternative? There is no real alternative from you know, backing, in terms of, like, because no Arab state's going to let you go and do anything. No Arab state's going to get involved. They're not going to send their militaries. They're not going to do anything like that. And no other party out there, or no other, like, real militia group is what are they doing? What, you're going to have Daesh come in and do something? If anything, they'll go support Israel, right? You know, so what alternative do we have right now but to maybe, like you say, the enemy of my enemy is not necessarily my friend, right? But is it, you know, is it kind of like you deal with what you have what you've been given, right? So Hezbollah right now is is kind of like the best option in terms of any type of resistance. But even then, I know it's very unfortunate for Lebanon in their situation, because Lebanon economically is, you know, savaged, right? They don't really have to anything. So is Iran the biggest backer right now, pretty much, of Hezbollah to keep on their mission?
I think Iran has kind of almost washed their hands with them, because they're not necessarily coming to their assistance. Everything's been somewhat token. It's kind of symbolic. I think they have thrown them under a bus, or say that, look, you know, just they're in this position, this kind of holding pattern. Just don't escalate too much. Israel is continuously poking for that reason. Imagine, look, on your own territory, foreign diplomats have been killed. All these events have happened. It's you know, your own IRG leadership have been wiped out on your own land, and you've done nothing. So I think that they're just playing they're only completely self-interested. And there's even a good case to say that effectively, you know, they're under America's spell, in terms of America has them banged to rights, basically puppets. So and all this stuff just being rhetoric. However, there's no good to be expected of the regimes, but you're forgetting something. These regimes are very unstable. Jordan, if any of these regimes were to crumble, that would be another border. So even you know, Syria, take Syria for example. When the revolution happened, America was anticipating his fall, until Russia and Hezbollah came in, and Daesh stabbed from the back. Daesh stabbed the legitimate revolution in the back as well, and then obviously collusion from Qatar and all these kind of players to coordinate to take out some. So I don't know, Qatar, whoever, the UAE, when they, for example, took out Ahrar Sham, all their leadership. So the point is, don't underestimate the fact that when it gets to a certain point, this is not going to be in our control. The Ummah, if it rises up, I know we've been saying this for some time, it's not necessarily under control. We don't know. But the thing is, look,
have people lost their appetite for removal? Like, I know it's very easy to say, and maybe it's not the best talking point, but Syria, I mean, like, it's still going on. It's not finished, first of all, right? It's still going on. And Syria was, like, we shouldn't really underestimate the level of damage. And now, okay, Syria is not a simple scenario. There were so many hands, so much meddling, so many different players going on. So it was very complex in terms of what happened over the last 10, 12 years or so, right? But what we can all kind of, I think, we agree on is just the level of destruction to people's lives, right? The amount of loss of life, the amount of like crimes against humanity and atrocities that have happened just alone in Syria. And you mentioned it, the Syrian regime is probably the worst out of all of them, right? Have people lost the appetite? I mean, I don't know if appetite is a good word. I'm not trying to like encourage people go and do all sorts of crap. But what I'm saying is there enough? Are people okay with the protesting and leaving at that? I don't know if I agree with the idea that the Saudis are as fragile or the Sisi is as fragile. Yeah, are we still in that era of the Arab Spring at Tahrir Square when millions of people are there protesting? Are we still in that era anymore?
I think what happened after the Arab Spring, it was usurped. However, when there's oppression, there's always going to be undercurrents where there's going to be a reverse. So some places which are genuinely unstable, Jordan, for example, is genuinely unstable. There is a sentiment on the street. The thing, for example, often what people tend to say is that, look, why haven't anyone done anything? If we look at the regimes, they are built on being Stasi-like. So they're basically the Nazis, the Nazi secret police, SS, etc. That's the Ba'ath Party. The entire state is on complete lockdown. The reason you don't see the people on the streets and in huge numbers, etc., is because of this security apparatus. Syria had a breaking point. The Arab Spring was a breaking point where people tested it. There was a repercussions and major clampdowns. However, we can't discount the fact that things can rise again. We're saying this in a position of luxury. We're saying this in a position of abstraction. It's all fine and well to say that. We can say that the nature of human societies and the nature of tyranny is that there will always be a point where it will be confronted. And when it starts, it becomes unstoppable. Allahu Alam, this could be it. We don't know the future. We don't know how it's going to pan out. What we can say is that we can add our voice. The voice we can add is obviously, in the West, the most important thing is to support Palestine in terms of upsetting the lies and the lies and the lies of the Zionist scumbag regime. And if ever you feel weak, I always say this, I always see this, in terms of like guys saying, they're being passive, they're not being unequivocal. For me, I don't know how a grown adult can sit with himself and sit right with himself when you see a 6-year-old child who's in these kind of problems. In fact, I'm not even going to go to Palestine. I'm going to go to Syria for this one. A friend, a brother, Payne, you remember, Arsim's cousin, the one, Tarek, TJ. Do you remember we had this massive get-together at Arsim's before he rebuilt his house? And we had all the guys down and TJ was there. And he came back from Syria and told us a story. TJ, his son had passed away in the riots in the UK a while back. And so, he was quite well known. And then this a 12-year-old girl in a camp, he described her legs were like she'd been hit by a birmil, a barrel bomb. He said her legs were like chicken wings. They're like decimated, completely just mashed up. She came over and she said she made dua for his son. And then he was like, like taken aback that this little child is kind of honoring or saying good things to him. And look at how she's gone through.
Yeah.
There's certain stories that happen in your life which are like effectively they're left in your brain. They leave a point in your brain. That left a point in my brain. Just hearing this story that a 12-year-old girl had that level of strength and taqwa.
Mm.
Now you look at Palestine, you see children shouldering the burdens that armies would quake at. What's our excuse? What is our excuse? To not even speak. To not even speak. Wallahi, I'm not joking, yeah? I swear I have to constrain myself from just not swearing like someone on Tourette's. When I just like I was watching that Elon Mehdi debate, I thought to myself, you know what, you guys, you're too posh, because I swear I would have just jumped over that pedestal and headbutt Elon till there's like just nothing. There'll just be jello left. Because I'm done with all this diplomacy rubbish. But the point is that our job, at the very least, is to speak out. Is to speak out, and that has massive impact. As an optional extra, if we can undermine the treachery on which our lands are ruled, if you can project the voice out to there, interact with people, say, look, this is not what Islam says. We have our own ideology, our own way of life. We have our own concept of accountability. We have our own concept of what is an acceptable form of governance. That's what we can do.
I also think we can also make use and take advantage of the changing currents, like in Saudi Arabia. Now, it's a dual edged sword, because you see in more and more videos, like I saw one on social media, some young girls dancing on some rap music or something like that, wearing the Saudi flag, and I think they look very young, probably 14, 15, 16, something like this, right? And I was thinking to myself, cool, and then obviously naturally comments saying X, Y, and Z, and I thought, yeah, I mean, this will only go so far, I feel, because while it's nice, that extreme dopamine and all that stuff is hitting the blood really good right now, right? And all the rush in the brain, and people are enjoying it, right? These freedoms that are being given. When it affects Saudi's own wives, when it affects Saudi's own kids, when they come back dressed in a certain way, or when the real problem will start for them, when the foreigners come in en masse. When before it was kept to compounds for foreign workers, and when the foreigners come en masse and they hear stories about their daughters, or they hear stories about their wives, or they hear stuff going on, the Saudis will automatically have a reaction, even if they were pro all these reforms and changes. Because when it hits their own backyard of their families getting involved in crazy things, or these things affecting their people, I think that will cause a reaction. I think on our end, we can make use of changes like that MBS is making, how he's stripping, well, he's already done it. He stripped the religious class, the scholars, he stripped their power away from them, right? The Wahhabi elite, the ruling elite, who genuinely had a lot of power for a long time to really influence, a lot of things in the kingdom. Within a decade, he's removed that already, right? And now they've realized their place as just mouthpieces for what he wants to implement. We, as people who do not agree with Wahhabism, and I understand, Wahhabi is one of the names used for Allah and all stuff. I don't use that in a negative term, but I call it Wahhabi because for me that's what it is, right? It's these notions and extremities of Ibn Abdul Wahhab that's been funded by X, Y, and Z. But now is the time to really, and people might say you're being sectarian, you're being this, and this is part of the divide and conquer mentality, and all of this sort of stuff, right? I don't see it that way, because, to be honest, the most sectarian are them, in my own honest opinion, right? They are the most sectarian. They bite at everyone but themselves, right? So sometimes a little taste of their own medicine is needed. But we can also take advantage of that. We need to dismantle and destroy currents, especially when the ruling elite and the finances behind this, type of narrative are being removed now slowly. Even they are distancing themselves, I know, for their own nefarious reasons and their agendas. But now is the time to also, put our efforts more into that, to show the world that something that has been, promoted and funded specifically to you as this puritanical, holistic movement that is all about free from innovations and the pure understanding is not what was advertised. And it is simply a prime understanding that upholds the same tyrants who are now distancing themselves from it. Why? You follow the paper trail. They don't need them anymore. They don't need the religious class anymore. People are slowly adopting the new ways of coming into the modern world of nationalism and secularism and all this stuff. Wahhabis are not useful for the Saudi regime in the long run that much, anymore, right? And I think as Muslims who don't agree with that narrative at all, that's something that we can also be doing, and we absolutely need to be doing.
One thing to, because look, as much as we may not agree with their points of view, obviously we don't agree with secularism either. The difference is this. Look, ironically, if Abdul Wahhab was alive today, he would make takfir over MBS.
he'd make the field of all the third wave Wahhabis sitting out today.
Okay, fair enough. So the point is that the stuff that he actually stood for, and though extreme was like ruling by other than what Allah has revealed, and never endorsed that. Saudi has riba banking,
and the reason why I bring all this up is, again, not to create that divide, but you see where it's part of understanding the mantles and the structure of why the rulers and the countries and the nation states exist the way they do. Part of it, the reason why you have Faris al-Hamadis, the reason why you have these type of people is because of this narrative, right? And they use this narrative to justify not doing anything, and to justify tyranny, and to basically cause, to give a blanket, justification for any type of destruction that can happen from these people, because they are apparently divinely protected at this point.
What? Yeah, I'm gonna bring this round. I'm gonna bring this round.
And they are not divinely protected, and this is the reason why I bring it up. The reason, this is where it may be a smaller aspect in the grand scheme of things, it's still a very important one.
I'm bringing this round. I'm bringing this round. The puritanical mentality of the extreme Judaic mentality that we're chosen. We have, we're chosen by Allah. We can't do any wrong. We have that protection. That same mentality was with Wahhabism and Al Saud. So because they had the right Aqidah, Al Saud had the right Aqidah, they could do no wrong. I call it tractor beam Aqidah. You're in that tractor beam. No matter what sin you do, you're protected because you're Aqidah. You go, Aqidah, like the movie Lethal Weapon, diplomatic immunity. That's what they had. So the thing is, look, what you call it? This is what upset what destroyed it? The truth, the volume of counterpoint in an open playing field. It was demolished. TIK TOK, all these mechanisms demolished the Zionist narrative. What can we do now then? We could use the same voice to demolish erroneous points of view. And to be honestly with you, yeah, I'm not gloating about this prospect because I don't want the kind of fitna that's going to come. However, what we can do is to say, look, okay, you adopted this point of view. This is where your weaknesses are.
Yeah.
This is where your weaknesses in your point of view are. This is a stronger point of view based on stronger understanding. So, for example, they say about Ulil Amr. Abdul Wahab would never say, I'm going to accept this ruler if he rules by kufr, if he allies with kuffar against Muslims. He'd be the first to say, I'm coming for you. They've effectively they've diluted their own creed.
Absolutely.
Now that they're done with them, they say, like, okay, we're done with you. So the point is this, look, it's our job to counter their point of view. So, for example, this blind subservience to rulers, this hijacking of the narrative to say that whatever he does, it got to, bro, I'm not even joking, it got to this point. This is during the time of Syria, yeah? There's a Madkhali. He said, even if the ruler fornicates in public TV, you cannot say anything. And there's a Syrian scholar who was joking, what, even if it's with your mother? He was just ripping into him how ridiculous this was. He was like doing a commentary on it. But that's the extent. The point is, we have to be that voice. We have to be that voice. Not to say we're not gloating here. We're not gloating at the fact that there's going to be fitna and fasad in STDs coming out of Saudi or unwanted pregnancies. We're not gloating about that. We're not gloating about these blaspheming people mocking Islam in the Muslim lands. But what we'll say is, this is where you went wrong. This is where you had a weakness understanding. This is your, like Jamil, for example, I mentioned before about the erroneous idea about kufr, duna kufr. This is where you went wrong. Also, another, even more important than that, how strong your Islamic creed is, because there's a high percentage of atheism in Saudi, for example, because it's anti-scientific.
And to try and look at it in a positive light, not that we simply like attacking Wahhabis or Madkhalis or this sort of stuff. It can be used, like, I mean, Yasser Qadhi is a perfect example of this, to reform. It can be used that even if people were, convinced of this understanding, I think all you have to do now is look, we speak to the Salafis, we speak to the Wahhabis and say, look, you were used. You were used by a despotic regime that ultimately did not care about you, right? And it preyed on, this simplistic understanding and maybe even a level of naivety. you saw something that made real sense to you, and you had the best of intentions, right? That you were following what you believe to be true Islam, and ultimately they used you for their gain, right? To uphold their crown, their billions and trillions of dollars, and now they're ready to throw you away, right? What we want to try and say to you is now, don't sit in that same world. Don't sit in that same of justifying everything they're doing. They have used and abused you. Open your eyes now. Open your eyes and actually look at what the reality is, who these people were there and who they've always been, right? They've always been nefarious Machiavelli types. They started out as caravan raiders, right? And highway robbers. And I don't mean that as a joke. It's just factually correct. That's where they started, their origin, right? They were, I believe Sheikh Mashri said they weren't fit to even be a mayor of a small town, let alone run a kingdom, right? So, like, people have to eventually open their eyes, and then this could be a way of positive reform. Like Yasir Qadhi, I'm not saying he's like a perfect example, but he's had such a huge transformation. He's been able, as someone who was so proficient in the Salafi dawah, who was probably one of the biggest figures in the Western world of that dawah, and pretty much the poster boy for that dawah. Even someone like him, after all his years, has been able to make a U-turn and be able to, kind of see the history for what it is. This could be a positive way of reforming, mentalities like this. And
one qualifier here. Excellent points, but one qualifier. When you say reform, define what you mean, because often there's reform and then mentality of deform. So America's example, there's a valid case whereby people, like you got Ribena concentrate, they've diluted it, so it's like with guests you don't even like them. Here's the vaguest hint of Ribena taste. That's what they've done to Islam.
Yeah. So not a push to secularization or to validate what these people are doing, but reform. I sense in the intellectual reform. Having starting back at the core. Of the basics of Islam, and then building people up again. It will take time. It's not going to be something in like a short-term thing, especially if you were so convinced of something for so long, right? It's going to take time. But an intellectual reform of, again, going back to the text, going back to the authentic, information, and working our way back up again. And there's no shame in this. There's no shame in this.
Exactly.
People can follow a certain understanding of Islam for majority of their life, but at the end of the day, it's not time which is the factor that makes it right or wrong. It's your alliances to the truth, right? And we ask Allah for hidayah. So whenever that comes, we have an obligation to strive that way. That's all it is.
Also, one
yes,
thing,
sorry, go on, Rush.
One quick one. One thing what was one reason why the Salafis, the people did take issue with them, was the divisive nature. So it's all very well someone following, for example, Hanafi, etc. But to say, okay, I follow this point of view, but you're a deviant, that's something else. Allah has a hand. What's your take on it? Oh, where's the precedent to say that you have to discuss these issues? If you adopted that point of view and you stayed quiet and you didn't call someone else a deviant, fine. But because you weaponized it, because you used that to make someone, it's the conveyor belt. You could when no one's looking, he's a kafir. When it's a bit. Oh, he's at the...
I mean, well, look, the foundation is good, because what the foundation says, right, is that we should be following the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that is absolutely correct, right? But the problem is, and this is something that Yasir Qadhi woke up to, is claiming to follow the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is actually being played second fiddle to following the opinions of government scholars that are quoting individuals which are not even from the first three generations in order to bring a canonized version of Islam. It's quite similar to the papacy in Rome, right? So basically with Yasir Qadhi, what he did, he looked at it and said, well, what is the basis of Salafiyya according to the Quran and Sunnah? Where is this term even used? Where is the commandment to even follow it? What is the true actual understanding of the Sahaba? Were they all these, righteous angels that were flying around in the air doing dhikr all day, or were they human beings? What is the definition of a Sahabi? These are all different topics that we can go into. But I think following his line of thought, which is to question, And like when Fahim says reform, it's almost like, you know, when someone embraces the deen, you call them a convert to Islam, but then you also call them a revert to Islam. When we're talking about reform, it's almost as if we're reverting to the true Islam, which is the Quran and the Sunnah, meaning understanding the Quran accurately in its proper context and the rules that are applied by it, and understanding the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ according to authentic, solid ahadith with minimal weakness and opinionism. And unfortunately, the claim of Salafiyya, which is to go back to the Quran and Sunnah, actually falls short of that and is largely based on opinionism. An example of that, I saw a couple of posts online, people talking about free mixing. My response to that was, okay, fine, Salafiyya, brilliant. Tell me which ayah or hadith uses the term free mixing. And the responses were so weak, like, oh, when you speak to the wives, speak behind a curtain. Okay, so now you're talking about the wives, you're talking about speaking to the wives, fine. Tell me where the term free mixing exists. No one could cover it. No one could deal with that issue. Because in reality, khalwa is covered by Quran and Sunnah, being seclusion between a non-mahram man and woman in private. But anything other than that is not covered in the Quran or the Sunnah, the way in which many people like to present this idea. And it's not just free mixing, it's a number of different things. And I know a lot of people whose lives were affected by that because they were told, for example, that free mixing is haram and to go to university is haram. So therefore, just give dawah on the dawah stall. Don't move forward with your life, because if you do go to university, it's haram and you could burn in hell. And no one had the intelligence to say, well, where's your evidence for that from the Quran or Sunnah? Just like now, oh, Qala al-Fawzan, Qala ibn Taymiyyah, Qala Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, Qala... Who are these people? And where is their opinion binding?
That's Rash's best friend, Fawzan.
Bro, the earth is flat. What are you talking about?
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Ben.
No, alhamdulillah. I was ending it anyway.
I mean, obviously not to like go too far into like tangents or the theological aspect, try and bring it back to the, you know, the Palestine. This is all relevant. You know, this is all, you know, it's very wide and there's a lot of factors to it. You know, part of it is the, you know, the intellectual reforming of people who, you know, to get them out of the mindset, you know, of supporting these. And we all have to, you know, do our bit, you know, inshallah.
This mentality is ultimately, what's it coming down to, is to empower the people to have an understanding. Because one of the biggest bid'ahs, which they don't talk about, is the loss of shura and hereditary monarchy. And this is from that point things precipitated to. So, for example, if we as an ummah are cognitive of our responsibility to account, to ask questions, to ask for evidence, that will give us the empowerment to then seek better governance, to have greater standards for others. And that is a practical point that what we can push forward. To go back to the text, to insist that somebody comes up with it. Imam Putney Jarvis said this in the book of Cyril. Say, bruv, that's not admissible because I just made that up. You know, we got to be that voice. We got to be that voice.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it all comes back to the same thing, right? Leading by example in every factor, you know, that affects this. But yeah, alhamdulillah.
Jazakallah khair.